like that's definitely a theme for our teaching this morning. But before we really dive in, I want to say Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, Happy Sukkot. It's wonderful to see all of us here together, especially after we've been spending so much time in shul already. So many of you know, because you were here for Yom Kippur, that I gave the community a gratitude challenge. So for more details on that, you could talk to me in the sukkah after services. But I gave myself, actually, and I think I planned this for myself before I decided to give the gratitude challenge to the community, a special Haftarah Sukkot challenge. For me, the Haftarah is a part of the service that I know is important, but I don't usually do a deep dive into. So I thought I'll take these 4 days of Yom Tov, these two today, tomorrow, and then next weekend to teach and learn about our Haftarot for Sukkot, because I've never done that before, and why not? So that was the plan. You can see that we are going to follow through with the plan somewhat, but I did have to. Oh, are we fine with the? Okay, more with the sound. Okay. Is the echo gone? Ooh, I've got head shaking this way and this way at the same time. Okay. All right. Do we have a sound technician in the house? Okay. Cantor's on it. So I know we like to be a lighthearted community, but I feel kind of on a serious note as I begin this teaching. I had to modify my plan for teaching about the Haftarah because the situation in Israel, as we all know, has been continuing to unfold for a while. And let me introduce where we're going with this, and then I'll open it up to the next thing. Okay, so Eitz Chaim, page 1252, an introduction to our Haftarah from our Chumash Eitz Chaim. This Haftarah begins with the siege of Jerusalem by all the nations, and it ends with their survivors being invited to Jerusalem for a sacred convocation and worship at the Feast of Sukkot. Looting and plunder give way to a forecast for the security of Jerusalem and its religious centrality for all. So here's this idea that our enemies attack us, some survive, and those enemies that survive, we worship with them, which is kind of like, wait, does this make any sense? Is this ridiculous, or is it aspirational? The idea is that our enemies come to be people that we want to spend time with, that we want to connect to God in their presence, and our enemies come to share our values. Again, ridiculous or aspirational, I'm not exactly sure, but speaking of ridiculous and aspirational and not being sure, the situation in Israel. So this update was sent out a week ago yesterday. So this is timely, but not so timely. I wanted to make sure to bring it up today before too much time passed. So this is from Rabbi Jacob Blumenthal, the CEO of the United Synagogue for Conservative Judaism and the Rabbinical Assembly. So the intro to what I'm about to say is that the Rabbinical Assembly has taken a stand on the situation in Israel. We don't have to agree with it as individuals, but as a community, we are belonging to the conservative movement as a community, and I am belonging to the conservative movement as an individual because I appreciate the perspective and guidance that the conservative movement has to offer on a variety of issues, and so we at least need to be aware of this, even if we don't agree with it. So if you have feelings, that's great, and we'll talk about it, but let's talk about exactly what was said. Okay, so again, this was sent the Friday before Yom Kippur, so everyone's pretty busy, but also a lot of rabbis, a lot of communities taking the time over the high holidays to give a message to their community about Israel, as I did in this community here. So here we go. Meeting at the Israeli consulate in New York. Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to the U.S. this week comes at a crucial time, both for what is happening in Israel and Israel's relationship with its most important ally, the United States, and with American Jewry. Okay, so then this morning, Ashira Konigsberg and I attended a Shacharit service preceding a rally for Israeli democracy close to the United Nations. So Ashira Konigsberg, in case you don't know, is a rabbi, and she's the chief operations officer of the RA. So this is not just like his friend Ashira, this is someone who's very important in our movement. And this rally for Israeli democracy close to the United Nations, I don't know if maybe some of you remember, I was reflecting recently on being invited to 2 different rallies that were saying opposing things, and so this is one of those rallies. This is a rally protesting the judicial reform. Some call it the judicial takeover, some call it the judicial overhaul, but I feel like the most common terminology is the judicial reform. So this is protesting the judicial reform. I'll continue with the email here. Our colleague Justin David, Dean of the Rabbinical School at Hebrew College, without getting too far into the weeds, Hebrew College is basically a cousin of the conservative movement, not technically a part of the conservative movement, but a very close relationship. So our colleague Justin David led Shacharit. Ayelet Cohen, who is Dean of the JTS Rabbinical School, obviously an important representative of the conservative movement, led a prayer for Israel, and dozens of our members were in attendance or had a role in its planning. At the rally that followed, our colleague Elliot Cosgrove, senior rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue, served as one of the headline speakers. So I don't know how many of us are familiar with Park Avenue Synagogue, but I was thinking about how to explain it. I would say it's the Sinai Temple of New York City. It's a major synagogue, and Elliot Cosgrove is a major rabbi and leader in that community.
And he grew up at Sinai Temple.
Hey, fun fact. Yashikoa. I didn't know that. Now I know. This is great. So we have not only a wonderful person who grew up at Sinai Temple and now heads Park Avenue Synagogue, but also deans of rabbinical schools, the high-ranking executives in the Rabbinical Assembly coming out to protest the judicial reform. Other people who have been doing this in the past months are Rabbi Daniel Gordis and Yossi Klein Halevi, two major pro-Israel, modern Orthodox-ish people who were born in America and have made Aliyah. They've been speaking, protesting the judicial reform for a few months now and really made a push for it right before Rosh Hashanah. And I think that a lot of us are aware that Rabbi Ed Feinstein of Valley Beth Shalom had a conversation with Yossi Klein Halevi recently, I think right before Rosh Hashanah, talking about these issues and saying that the judicial reform is a problem. So we have a lot of people in our leadership coming out with this message. So I'll continue. The Prime Minister gave a powerful speech at the UN in which he was optimistic about peace with Saudi Arabia, denounced Iran, and presented a powerful vision for a Middle East that could become a blessing for all humanity, which is what we're going for, right? That would be great. We haven't gotten there yet, but we haven't given up. Okay, so later today, I'm writing now because we will not be able to get a message out before Shabbat and then Yom Kippur, recognizing time is tight here. I will represent our conservative/Masorti movement at a meeting with the Prime Minister. I am hopeful that I will have the opportunity, along with others in the room, to both listen to how the Prime Minister understands current events in Israel and also to convey our concerns based on our RA's resolutions and recent statements on Israel. So if you were reading the email, you could click on those. Unfortunately, you can't click on the paper and have much happen, but we'll continue anyway. So these concerns include, first, as in Israel, the protesters at today's rally attended out of love for Israel and Zionism. Demonizing protesters, whether in Israel or the US, as allies of Iran or enemies of the state, is divisive and counterproductive. They are a sign of a thriving democracy that we all seek to protect. So the statement that the protesters are a sign of thriving democracy is articulated here in this email. Also, I heard recently, looking at recent sermons by my colleagues and my mentors, Rabbi Sharon Brous and Rabbi Nolan Leibovitz, they, two very different people, as we all know, they both agreed and stated very plainly that the protesters are a sign of a thriving democracy. This is something that the conservative movement is coalescing around. We support a strong democratic state of Israel, based on the best of Jewish values that upholds and protects individual and minority rights as enshrined in Israel's Declaration of Independence. This idea of minority rights, I'm going to come back to in a little bit, but I'll read a little bit more first. Okay. We understand that no democracy is perfect, including in the US. However, addressing those concerns should be done through a process that engages a broad spectrum of voices in Israel. Especially given the real threats to Israel's security, this would seem to be a moment where a government should be bringing the people together, rather than pressing such a divisive issue. So we have to take into account the fact that we have to protect our holy land. It's not just about the fight that we're having amongst ourselves, it's the dangers that have not gone away, even though we have a little issue that we need to work out amongst ourselves, the Jewish people. There's bigger things that we have to worry about, and we can't get distracted from that. That's a very serious thing. Okay, so we oppose the current proposals to reform the judiciary in Israel. And yes, reform is in quotation marks. They would severely weaken the separation of powers between the judiciary and the Knesset, and together with other quote, quote, administrative changes, weaken democracy. The Supreme Court's ability to review and strike down legislation, as well as review other administrative policies of the government, has always been crucial to our movement's religious freedoms. So that's what I'm going to talk about in just a moment here, our movement's religious freedoms and minority rights. I'll finish reading the bullet point, though, first. We also support the court in its role protecting the rights of other minorities, and it is a reminder that democracy is not just about the rights of the majority, but how well a society protects freedom for all. Okay. So what are these religious freedoms and what are these minority rights? These are things that I'm not sure if we're all aware of, but they definitely apply to all of us. So I wanted to just lay them out there. Let's start with something pretty basic. This is a religious service. Unless I'm really mistaken, this is a religious service, and we have mixed seating. We have mixed seating. We do not have a barrier in the middle where one gender is on one side and one gender is on the other. Mixed seating allows us to sit next to our families, our spouses, our friends, our children. Mixed seating is something that we, I think, take for granted. I don't walk into this sanctuary and think like, oh, wow, isn't it great that we have mixed seating? It's something that is so taken for granted for our community, but in Israel, it's not something that's taken for granted. To have a religious service with mixed seating, that's a minority right that we, the conservative movement, really want to protect. Okay, so here's another thing. Women leading prayer, reading Torah, and being rabbis. That's obviously a big thing for the conservative movement, for me personally, and I think for our community. Another thing that is a little bit more difficult to talk about, but really important, is conversion. A conservative conversion is a real conversion, according to the conservative movement. This impacts my family. This impacts, I think, a lot of families in the synagogue. And this is something that, in protesting the judicial reform, the Rabbinical Assembly is supporting the validity of conversions done by the Rabbinical Assembly. A big deal. Something that is a little bit, I don't know, a little bit more academic, but also spiritual, that I think will apply to many of us. This idea that we can use resources of academic scholarship, like literary analysis, to study the Torah. We don't have to only use orthodox methods of studying the Torah to understand the Torah. We can put things in historical context, and that is not sacrilegious. That can be part of how we love Torah. And again, the people that are creating the judicial reform are against doing that. I think that's something that at least I take for granted pretty much all the time. And last and certainly not least, the judicial reform would be against acceptance of LGBT families and individuals, and the conservative movement, where while there is some diversity of opinion in regards to LGBTQIA plus things like marriage, but there is no diversity in the conservative movement in terms of inclusion. The conservative movement is unanimous on gay and lesbian people have to be given full synagogue membership. They cannot be denied aliyot. They are Jews just like any other Jews. And so these are the things that the Rabbinical Assembly is continuing to work to advance when the Rabbinical Assembly opposes judicial reform. I know this is a lot, and I think it's important to talk about. So now we'll move towards our closing. We share the Prime Minister's concerns about the threat posed by Iran, the resurgence of terrorism against Israelis, and the interest in strong ties with the Arab world, including the Abraham Accords and the possibility of a new relationship with Saudi Arabia. So there's more to this than just the ability to have a conservative prayer service, as we know. I'm sure that many other topics will be addressed, but I hope this gives a sense of how we are approaching this important moment. Our statements and talking points are developed in collaboration with our colleagues in Israel and throughout the world. I look forward to the opportunity to greet the Prime Minister and to share our concerns. Wishes to each of you for a Gamar Chatima Tova, and may we be blessed with a more peaceful world and a more united Jewish people in the year to come. Warm regards, Jacob. So that's a lot. I think that for me, I'm still continuing to process and think through and feel through all of this. I imagine many of you will be having the same experiences, and as always, I welcome the conversations that will happen in our community and with me on these issues. And we have to close on an aspirational note. We have to close on an aspirational note with this conversation. And we will, and it's a pasuk that we all know, which is from our Haftarah. I hope that some of us at least noticed when it was read. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day there should be one Lord with one name. We all know this one. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz. Bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. Kein Yiratzon, Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.